We have to look at the big question, which is the current approach to Brexit one big mistake? And will the UK crash out without a deal? And we have to look at the health questions. In either scenario, a hard or a soft Brexit, how will patients and innovation and trade be best protected? This is all still too early to call. As a scientist I had lunch with said, it's very difficult because we haven't got any data for this. Well, it's true, we haven't got any data for it, but we have to try and tease out what can be done about it. UK government policy might be depicted by someone who took a negative view of what was happening as being driven by an unstoppable bunch of Tory radicals and Europhobe demagogues who are resistant to any concessions or compromise. Some of you will have probably heard yesterday in the European Parliament, Nigel Farage, I pronounced the name with caution. You think we're hostages? We're free to go, he said. He didn't go on to say where the UK is free to go, but it was very much his point of view. Nor did he say anything about at what cost. So we're going to look at these questions through the eyes of some experts, from government, from industry, the investment community, the legal and IP worlds. But before I introduce our panel, let me just define what we're aiming to discuss and what we have to leave out for pressure of time. Our main focus is going to be on how to pursue minimal disruption to the flow of valuable healthcare products to patients when we have a rupture from the EU. Because that currently, as you all know, predominates in all the arrangements covering the legal background, the regulations, the supply chains, research, staffing, intellectual property protection. And we're going to look at this not just from the UK perspective, but at what it could mean for international operations. Obviously, in the remaining EU 27, and also for firms operating in the worldwide market. We won't have time, unfortunately, to look at many of the other major issues that this presents. These are things that range from questions of staffing of the UK National Health Service to issues of medical training and so on. But we have to focus on what we're doing today. So, health, biopharmaceuticals. In doing that, we can't ignore the UK political context. Ultimately, in the upcoming negotiations, the UK Prime Minister will face a very simple and clear choice. On the one hand, she can choose to make some concessions against the original no deal, better than a bad deal, and secure a deal that will give the best chances for the economy, for trade, for investment, for innovation, for patients. And that will mean she'll have to face down the right wing of her party who want, apparently, Brexit at any cost. Or she can bow to the wishes of the hard Brexiteers and cause massive disruption for everyone else, including patients in the healthcare sector. That's what we're aiming to talk about. So let me first introduce a representative of the UK government, Emily Hamblin. Emily is regional manager of the UK government's Science and Innovation Network in West Europe, based in Paris. Over the last decade, she's worked in the Trade and Investment Service, the Government Office for Science, and the Department for Business, where she was Senior Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for Business. Emily, would you care to join us on stage? And pick yourself up a microphone and see if it works.
Hello.
It does.
Yes, I think that works.
So, the UK approach is a bit of a moving picture. Give us an update from your point of view on the best scenario that the government sees at present for healthcare products.
Sure. Well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming.
To be part of this debate, which I'm sure is going
Daniel in the lion's den, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be very interesting. The first point I wanted to make was just about actually the importance of the life sciences sector for the UK, something which the UK government is very much aware of and proud of. For example, I know that about 1 in 4 of the most popular prescription medicines in the world were developed in the UK, And I think it's 17 of the top, the biggest 20 pharmaceutical companies also have a site in the UK. So this is a really key sector for the UK. And also the UK is really, globally speaking, very much world-class and at the forefront of life sciences, which is why it's really great to be here today. And our ambassador from the embassy in Paris was also down here earlier in the week to attend this conference and talk about the importance of life sciences. Coming back to Brexit and where we are in that process, you'll all have seen our Prime Minister, Theresa May, last week triggering the Article 50 process and setting out her clear plan and the government's priorities for this negotiation and where we want to get to. And I just wanted to underline a couple of those that I think are relevant to this debate. So firstly, one of her top priorities for the negotiation is to maintain the UK's position as the go-to place for innovators and for investors. And I think that that's really key. It's also to achieve an ambitious and bold free trade agreement between the UK and the European Union. And as we go through the Brexit process, to provide as much certainty as we go through the process as is possible as we go along, and to guarantee as quickly as possible the rights of UK citizens in EU member states and of EU citizens in the UK. So I think that's what the UK is aiming to do with the Brexit negotiation, to answer your question. And we're also taking several actions within the UK government more at a national level. So for example, the government is currently developing its new industrial strategy, consulting at the moment, and they've very much put science and innovation and research at the heart of that strategy. And sectors such as life sciences, again, are at the heart of that strategy. And that's been backed up, for example, by an additional investment of 4.7 billion into UK research and development out to 2020, which is actually a really big investment. That's the biggest increase in R&D public investment for, I think, 40 years. Since the end of the 1970s, which I think again demonstrates the level of importance that the UK government puts on our science, research, innovation, and sectors such as life sciences.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I'm delighted that there's a UK government representative here, and it's very encouraging to hear you restate all those phrases that we've heard frequently from Downing Street and Whitehall. And as we go on today with this discussion, I'm sure there'll be a possibility of exploring how far these pious aspirations amount to anything that's a realistic expectation. But for the moment, let me just ask you, if you will, because you're clearly a realist since you've agreed to come here, you might accept that there are some challenges in reaching this nirvana that Theresa May has set out so eloquently over the last few weeks. Where do you see the biggest challenges from your perspective in terms of life sciences and particularly healthcare?
Sure. So I think there are probably 4 areas in particular that I'd highlight and that I think will probably get discussed in more detail throughout the debate. So I'll just talk about them at quite a high level. I think the first one is probably a challenge for the sector. Something that we really need to get right is movement of talented people, which is so crucial to the success of the sector. I think that's something that we're very much aware of within the UK government, the important contribution that international and including in particularly European researchers, people in business make to the life sciences sector, and that needs to be protected and enabled. And you'll have seen in the UK government's budget announcements in March that additional 300 million of funding was put into supporting high-level skills, including with a particular focus on enabling global mobility of talent. So I think that's key around people. I think there's also a key issue around funding and access to the kind of funding that supports collaboration, international collaboration, European collaboration, and innovation. And there I would just like to highlight that the UK government has guaranteed funding through competitive European funding sources, such as Horizon 2020, so that the funding awarded under those projects is guaranteed for the full life of the projects, even where the projects go beyond the date where we'll leave the EU. which is in recognition of this need for certainty, because obviously nothing is changing immediately over the next 2 years while we negotiate what our future relationship will look like with the European Union. And in that interim period, it's really important that people have as much certainty as possible to be able to continue to fully engage with and contribute to things like Horizon 2020 projects. So that's people and funding. The other two key issues that I'll mention just briefly are regulation, with issues such as the future of the EMA, the European Medicines Authority, being key, and trade in quite a broad sense, which is of course relevant to all sectors, including life sciences, and where, as I mentioned before, the ambition of the UK government is to reach a bold and ambitious free trade agreement covering goods and services. So that's very much kind of top-level answer, but hopefully
And it's very welcome.
start us off.
And I thank you very much for that, and I thank you for being brief. So now we're going to bring in a leading figure from one of the organisations likely to be deeply affected, whichever way it happens with Brexit, the UK drug industry. Virginia Acha is the Executive Director for Research, Medical and Innovation at ABPI, the principal link also between the UK's research-based drug industry and the UK government's approach to Brexit. She also plays key roles in European and international drug industry strategic reflections, so she's absolutely on top of the game. But her background also includes work on R&D, innovation policy for Amgen and Pfizer, a decade as an academic on innovation strategy at Imperial College Business School and elsewhere. Ginny, thank you very much for getting here. You probably have to dash off in a moment to give a lecture at the IC Business School, but
that'd be fun.
Give us, please, before you do that, your key concerns as you see it at the moment. We'll perhaps come back and pick up some of the points that Emily made in more detail, but give us your top-line concerns as an industry at the moment.
Yeah. So, and thanks again for being part of the conversation today again around Brexit. So we have been having these discussions literally since the day after the referendum. Because I'm sure everybody in the audience knows, for the development of medicines, we are looking across Europe when we think about how we discover and develop them, regulate them, and manufacture and supply them. So for us, this is not a question of, wait and see. This is about getting to brass tacks quickly. So our 4 priorities very much mirror what Emily's described. We'll be very plain about it, though, on the regulation front. We're looking for as close alignment with European regulation as we can arrive at, because our regulation are really our standards by which we can get our medicines approved. That makes a difference to us, and the partnership in Europe has been really productive and one that we wouldn't throw away lightly. Trade, frictionless trade, I think you discussed. The ability to recruit talent and our support for continued funding for research and collaboration is key. But I would just take it one step further, which is our priorities now and our concerns are that we're going to have two horizons that we're really thinking about. The first is, how do we resolve things so that on day one, after the UK leaves the European Union, we don't have a problem with the way we can deliver our medicines. So we don't have an elderly lady in London or somebody in Cambridge or somebody up in Scotland who can't get access to the medicines which they need. That's a critical issue. We can't let that one drop. So that's primary for us right now, is understanding what do we need to do between now and when we leave the EU in 2 years' time. Beyond that, it's the strategic aim. What does the UK want to be in the global world of life sciences? And how can we continue to be part of the European partnership that has been so effective in the last 4 decades? This, for us, will be a critical stage on the strategic discussions, and we've been working with our colleagues in biotech. So I represent the research-based pharmaceutical industry. This likewise affects my colleagues in biotech. So I work very closely with the BIA in the UK, and we work very closely with government, because we think the only way you're going to get this resolved is doing some very practical, pragmatic planning from now. So that's what we've been doing.
Okay, so thanks for that for a kickoff. I'll come back to you in a minute if I may. But I'd like to bring in another player, look at the picture. ABPI, of course, has concerns about patients, as you legitimately point out. You want to make sure it works for them. I'm not suggesting that looking at it from a strictly business perspective excludes patients, but I'd like to bring in a figure from a leading consultancy, Andrew Packman, who's pharma and life science leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers UK, where he specializes in international corporate services to business. He's worked on drug pricing, R&D funding, taxation, patents, and he's currently focusing on the impact of Brexit on the pharmaceutical industry. So, Andrew, can you give us your best case scenario as you see it at present for the industry in the UK and elsewhere?
Well, I'd start by saying that it's encouraging that what Emily and Ginny have been saying have been so closely aligned, because I think there is clarity on the key issues which face the industry and the importance for there being early resolution on those key points around trading, around regulation, access to people and funding. I think the point which Ginny makes about regulation is obviously particularly important, and no one's suggesting that this is easy, but I think there is such clear mutuality of interests in the EU and in the UK for a sensible, pragmatic solution to be reached to these issues in the benefits of everybody, and in the benefits of patients and people living in the EU and in the UK, that I think it is reasonable to be optimistic that a sensible approach will be reached relatively quickly and easily.
Okay, well, I thank you for that. I think I'm going to ask you if you entertain a worst case scenario when you look at this to advise your clients on all the options.
Well, I mean, one could play sort of a parlour game of what might happen. I mean, I suppose
That's exactly what we're doing.
But I think what I would say is that, I mean, Brexit's, it's not unimportant, but there are pretty important other things going on. Frankly, what's going on in America for the industry is much more important. If President Trump brings in US tax reform in the way in which he is expecting, that will have an enormous impact on the industry in Europe. If there are important elections coming up around Europe over the next year, if those elections were to lead a major country to have a less firm commitment to the euro, for example, that would have a much greater impact on the ability to make long-term decisions. So yes, it's important that we get clarity on some of the points which Ginny and Emily have been talking about, but it's one of a number of issues which we need to look at in what has been perhaps a slightly surprising 12 months.
Okay, well, thank you for that for the moment. I'm sure that plenty of people will want to come back to you to press you further on that. But I'd like to also now look at another aspect, which is investment. And I'd like to introduce Anne Horgan, who is from Sofinova, Senior Associate in the Life Sciences team of this risk capital operation. She has a focus on investment in biopharmaceuticals, and her background includes work on preclinical programs in pain and obesity as a medicinal chemist in a startup, and technology transfer and commercialization of intellectual property arising from cancer research. So Anne, you know the business inside and outside from the research and investment side. What do you see as the implications for startups?
Well, firstly, thanks very much for having me. It's great to see the
pleasure to have you here.
And the diversity. And I guess, absolutely, I would like to give you a bit of an idea of what we see with regards to the impact on startups. And I think I'd expand that a little bit on people from the financing community, because our fate is very closely linked. So from the startup point of view, I don't think I will say anything you haven't heard before from my colleagues here. The issues are very general. I'll just name them so they are out there. But I think from a startup point of view, the very important thing is firstly the research on which the startup is going to be based. So it's a question of access to financing to that research, Horizon 2020, etc. So I will pass that on. The second aspect is having access to financing people like ourselves. So if you know our partners, as I think many of you know, are based in France, but we invest globally throughout Europe and throughout North America primarily. And it means that we can find ways of deploying our 300 million euro fund in various countries. And we need to figure out whether the UK, for example, is a good place to be. And I don't think that's today's debate, but that's another thing the startups have to think about, who can finance them. On the operational side, there is an impact of Brexit on these startups. We talked about clinical trials a little bit, regulatory, market access, etc. And I think that's a very important consideration for both startups and finances. And lastly, I think the important human aspect. which is about recruitment of talent, and people like us, certainly at Sophie Nova Partners, we invest in people. We believe the entrepreneurs are the ones who are going to make something a really big success, and having the best talent to be able to take forward the best innovation is something which is critical. And I guess on the financing side, and that's the end of my slight broadening of your question, of course, financiers like Sophie Nova Partners or all our colleagues in the VC community need investors themselves. And one of the large investors are EIF, not to name them, but of course they invest in a lot of VC funds, be they in UK or in the rest of Europe, and we need to understand how Brexit will affect or not their ability to invest in funds.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I'll come back to you in a minute, perhaps, to ask you a little bit more detail on some of those points that you've raised. But I'd also like to bring onto the stage to talk about particularly the intellectual property protection issues, which are central to so many aspects of innovation in the healthcare sector. Christopher McKenna. Chris is a partner and intellectual property lawyer with Foley and Lardner, based in Boston. His work involves all the aspects of patent protection and strategic counseling, ranging from startups to worldwide portfolio management for international companies. And he has background himself in startups in IT. So,
that's correct, Peter.
Chris, from the Foley perspective, what are the obvious questions that arise for you in terms of IP?
Well, if you're an innovator or company that holds IP, the first question, well, how does this impact my IP? The IP that I have, is it going to stay in place? And then going forward, how is that going to change? So those are the two main questions. And there's a temporal component here. First of all, just because we have Brexit, the sky's not falling on IP. Currently, all the mechanisms for IP protection are in place, right? As UK is going to be part of the European Union for at least 2 years, and some of my colleagues tell me that it may go on for about 4 years before they finally withdraw. So during that phase, all the current IP protection mechanisms that you have in place are going to stay in place, and you can still use those to your benefit. Now, things will change. So let's talk about the transition phase. There are some IP rights, for example, European Union trademarks, European Union design rights, which are meant to cover all of Europe, so you can file once and protect yourself. Those are going to change. As soon as UK is no longer part of the European Union, those rights will not protect yourself in the UK, so companies will have to take some different action in order to protect themselves there. We would hope that because IP is a very important aspect to supporting the innovation in industries, that there's usually planned for continuity, right? So there'll always be an opportunity for patent owners, or we expect there to be, to take the action to continue the protection, even though the laws may change at the time of withdrawal. Then there's going to be post-withdrawal considerations, right? We're going to live in a world where if everything plays out the way we expect and UK does withdraw from the EU, there'll be a hybrid model. So whatever model existed before, there'll be opportunities or different ways and mechanisms to protect yourselves that you're going to have to consider. And it's going to be some strategies you're going to have to form. So these companies who are going to file for patent protection or do litigation enforcement post-withdrawal are going to have to take the same considerations they do now, but with a different landscape. They're going to have to look at their markets they access in terms of revenue, where the competitive landscapes are, the cost of maybe filing in the UK versus somewhere else, or enforcing the UK versus somewhere else, and they're going to have to figure out strategies to do that, and that will differ between the type and size and posture of the company.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Again, we'll come back, and perhaps people in the audience will also have questions about some of the practical, but yes, not just yet, though, if you'd be kind. I'm delighted you're interested, and I shall encourage you to come in again a little bit later on. But our big question that we really have to deal with amid all of this detail is whether we're standing on the railway line waiting for the train to crash into us or not. As one senior EU official put it the other day to me, we are now in an absurd tragedy in which all of us must play our predestined roles. Or as Guy Verhofstadt expressed it yesterday in the European Parliament, this is all a catfight in the Conservative Party that got out of hand. A loss of time, a waste of energy, a stupidity. So to be fair, since obviously I'm conscious and I'm asking questions about some of the potential challenges, it seems only fair to ask before we go any further, are there any upsides to Brexit? We've heard, obviously, what Emily's suggesting, and I think we're all probably very familiar with Theresa May's pronouncements about a generation's chance to shape a brighter future for Europe. Sorry, for this country. A terrible mistake there. Nothing about Europe. I'm glad to see you're all still following the plot. And all this talk of Britain becoming stronger, fairer, more united, maybe it will. We have to see. So I would like to see if any of you, like the boss of Syngenta, who went on the record the other day to say that it wasn't changing Syngenta's plans at all. I don't see any major issues, and the UK just became a cheaper place to do things, to do research and make things, he said. So clearly there is no absolutely one view on this. So let me take each of you in turn. I'll leave you out of this, Emily, because I know that you're bound to say that it's a terrific thing and we're all going to live forever if it goes ahead in the way that Theresa May.
I don't get to say that.
Andrew.
Tell us, what are the upsides?
Well, I think, I mean, the starting point clearly is that I think there's a recognition that it is in the interest of the UK and of the European Union for there to be a strong relationship for the future. And I think that there is, I think from an EU perspective, the UK perhaps was not always entirely in agreement with the direction of travel which the European Union or some parts of the European Union wanted to go in. And so in terms of the way in which ever closer union develops and perhaps the greater political integration, without the UK, I think the European Union has a real opportunity to progress that agenda perhaps rather more quickly than it had before. And if, in support of the euro, I think that is potentially a very good thing for the EU. From a UK perspective, we do have we have a slightly different outlook and history perhaps, and so I think it does give us the opportunity to respond rather more quickly than perhaps a larger group is able to do to a changing world. Now clearly the industry needs the ability to be able to plan for the long term, for the very long term, but there are a number of factors which feed into our ability in the West, if I can use that expression, to compete with Asia, and I think the UK is likely to be the place to come to for Americans and for people from the Far East to approach Europe. So I think if approached in the right spirit, this is possible. It's possible to see a good answer for the European Union and for the UK. Okay, thank you for that. Ginny, can I ask you?
Sure. So I'll get a little bit parochial then, because my background when I was working at Amgen in particular was in regulatory. And most people don't like to talk to regulatory people very often. I don't know why that is, but it's a dull area maybe. And when we talk about the excitement of innovation in medicines, people don't always sort of think, I want to talk about your regulation. Well, actually, for the last 10 months, I've been talking about regulation pretty much every day. And actually, what it's doing is it's reminding us of how important that system has been. So I was quite pleased to hear last week at a panel when Melanie Carr from EMA was speaking to the DIA Euro meeting that they're using this as an opportunity to reflect also within the European Medicines Agency about efficiencies, about are we doing things in the best way possible? And is there a way to think forward in how we look at supporting innovation in medicines through regulation? We're having the same conversations with the MHRA. So suddenly, regulation has gotten very sexy, but I think that's really meaningful when Anne is talking to her small startups, when they're looking at very novel products, gene therapies, cell-based therapies. I have regulators at the front and center of discussion with politics right now. So I have the government very focused on the importance of regulation, and honestly, that's the first time that's ever happened. So that's my silver lining.
Okay, thank you. Yes, go on.
Yeah. So thank you, Peter. One thing we discussed in the preparation before this, just among us team members, and kind of given maybe the outsider view, right, is post-withdrawal. If you're UK, you kind of have a clean sheet of paper. There's an opportunity to change a lot of policies, tax incentives to either improve innovation, help industry, and do it in a way that it might be flexible. But then we talked about the realities of doing that. There's a lot of constraints in doing that, right? Is that UK is still going to be actively doing commerce in the European Union. They're going to have their own regulations. You're going to have to fit into this model You know, if you're an investor like Ian, you want to make sure there's some comfort level and that you're not so different from the rest of the world, even though that you may have some incentives there so that she feels comfortable in the risk. And there's a level of, lack of a better term, compliance or collaboration or cooperation still needed in order for UK to do your commerce effectively with everyone else. So we talked about those kind of tensions between having flexibility, withdrawing from the EU, but in reality, there's a balance in policy so that you can still do business in a predictable way that's comfortable to all the stakeholders.
Okay, thanks for that. Anne.
I think a lot of things have already been said. Perhaps I'll add something a little bit controversial.
I'll ask you
as
first
well.
next time.
No, that's quite all right. I think it's quite important as well to say when we talk about upsides for the whole ecosystem, it might be perhaps downside for one country, upside for the rest. So I'll just add a little bit of nuance, which I did mention earlier about getting the right people to do the right job. Now I'm a French citizen and I work here in France these days after 18 years in the UK. And what I would say is sometimes it is a little bit more difficult to attract talent in France versus London, right? Paris, London, not necessarily the same kind of appeal also because of the language. But I'm thinking if it's making a lot more difficult for entrepreneurs or scientists or clinicians to work in the UK, well, maybe it's our gain somewhere else. So there is an upside, which perhaps is a bit controversial on purpose, and I'm sure there'll be some questions on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course you can. I was just about
Thank
to
you.
offer you that opportunity to correct my absolutely outrageous caricature of Theresa May.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add really that, of course, I wouldn't want to downplay how difficult and complicated negotiating something of this scale and complexity that is unprecedented is going to be. But just to underline, as I was saying at the beginning, the strengths of the UK life sciences sector, which I think aren't by accident, and that is obviously thanks to the ingenuity and the innovativeness of people, entrepreneurs, researchers based in the UK, but it is also not by accident that the UK government has created an environment that very much favours that kind of innovation. And so I think that puts us in a really good position to be optimistic about the future and about how we can capitalise on this opportunity to, like you say, have more of a blank sheet of paper and think about what more we can do to support the sector. You know, things like our patent box, things like our R&D tax credits, things like our world-class universities are real strengths that we can really make the most of.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now, everyone seems to agree. It's all wonderful, and yes, I know you've got a question as well, and so have you, and I'm delighted to see that, and you will indeed have your chance, but I'm afraid I'm running this, so you have to wait a minute. So, everyone agrees the world is wonderful, it's not going to be very difficult, there's no big problems. But we've been bouncing along at the level of a bit of sort of nice, easy, fluffy generalizations. I wonder perhaps if I can ask you to get a little bit more impertinent with one another. Ginny, for instance, let me try and make you impertinent. It will be an uphill struggle, I'm sure. But when you hear what Emily says that's so reassuring about the fact that all these aspirations are going to come true and that the UK is going to be even stronger when it's on its own, are you very reassured by this? Are there any areas where you feel that when you go a little bit more into the detail, it might not all be quite so easy?
I think it's entirely the detail. So I had this conversation a number of times with my colleagues at the MHRA, our regulator in the UK, and all of the issues, if you take them singularly, they're very doable. Yes, you can make an arrangement for this. Can I make an arrangement for a licensing authorization and get it transferred? Yeah, I can do that. Can I do that for 5,000 of them all on the same day? Maybe not so easy. And this is where the real impact for my money is on Brexit, and why it's so important that we do the planning now and in a lot of detail, is that if I pick any sector, and obviously life sciences is mine, I can pick any number of things that will take a lot of planning and a lot of detail, because it's just so many, it's so difficult to see how you can do this in a short time frame. So I think our shared enemy, both for the UK and Europe, is time. We have very little time to make what is really a fairly unprecedented scale of change. So Hence my need to do a lot more
Fine.
detail. I'm not comfortable until we do that.
Okay, well, we perhaps go into some more of that in detail. Andrew, can I ask you just to go a little bit further when you take things really quite optimistically, if I'm not caricaturing your position, when you hear people on the other side, and I know you have lots of contacts in Brussels, you said yourself while we're having lunch, there are many different views in Brussels and indeed across the 27 member states, but you can't obviously have been completely unaware of the fact that there are many voices in Brussels, in member states, in the institutions, who suggest that this actually could be very bad news for Europe and for the UK. What is it that makes you so confident that it's safe to ignore some of the siren warnings about, for instance, crashing out without a deal? What is it that makes you so confident that although the UK government is very keen on reaching a deal, those aspirations won't be confounded by reticence or resistance from member states or the Parliament?
Well, clearly there is inherent uncertainty as to what people will agree, and I'm just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there is no risk associated with this process or that we know how this will turn out. However, I start from the premise that it is demonstrably in the interests of the European Union and the UK for a sensible, pragmatic agreement to be reached, whether that is basic Adam Smith economics around access to markets, whether that is the need of the European Union for access to the City of London's financing capability, whether that is the basic, some of the issues around security and some of the broader issues which we face. So I'm not taking a Panglossian view of this. I'm not suggesting that this is all easy and straightforward and that we know with certainty that this will end up this will end up well. But all I would say is that Mr. Farage does not speak for the British government or for very many people in the UK, and there are people in Brussels who have their own domestic electorates to appeal to, and there will be, I'm sure, some rather intemperate comments at the edges of this. But it seems to me that there is a good body of opinion which will want to move to agree a sensible working arrangement. And the point which Ginny makes about time is clearly a very important one. But I think it was interesting that the Prime Minister, just in the last few days, has been signalling, I think, that there needs to be an agreement to agree, but there may well then be a period of implementation. That isn't the word she uses, is it? It is implementation. So a process of implementation which may take a little longer. And actually, the point you made, you repeated the comment about this all being a fight within the Conservative Party. Well, actually, 52% voted one way, 48%, including me, voted the other way. Actually, there is a range of views, and Her Majesty's government needs to take the whole country with it, not just one element of it. So am I saying this is all easy and straightforward? No, I'm not. But I think these sensible people working together with mutual interest, it's reasonable to think that a sensible position will be reached. And that's certainly, I think it's, but the last thing I would say, and I've probably spoken too great a length, the last thing I would say is I do think it behoves all of us to approach this in as positive and as upbeat approach way as we can. Otherwise, we are in danger of allowing Mr. Farage and others, or Farage, I should say, to give the impression that he speaks for a much larger constituency that he does. Most people in the UK value see themselves as Europeans and want to have a good relationship with a strong European Union in the future.
Okay, well, I hear what you say. Yes, okay, I'll accept one or two very brief questions here. I'm going to be very tight on timing on this. And if you make your question too long, I shall be very rude and cut you off. But there's one there, and there was a gentleman at the back there as well, and one there. So let's take a couple of questions.
Would you like us to introduce ourselves or not?
No, just give me a question.
Okay, so my comment is actually for Emily. Thank you for your optimistic appraisal of the situation. I'm afraid I don't share it because I'm a researcher and the title of this meeting is One Health, One Place, and it's supposed to bring lots of European partners together to talk about.
I'm going to press
One
you to
Health,
be very
One
brief with
Place.
your question.
But if the, Brexit goes ahead as full steam the way it is, I think we're not going to have the mobility that we need to achieve the research objectives and collaborate. So I think we're going to lose out. And I don't really think the British government's put enough mechanisms in place to fill that funding gap that's going to be created once we leave the EU.
Okay, your comments noted. There was no. I will take a few questions. Greg, you can wait a minute. Someone else had their hand up first. Over there, and then over there, and then over there, and then Greg. Make them very brief, please.
Okay, you want a quick
Yep,
question?
I do.
A very quick one.
Don't waste time saying a quick one. Just ask the question.
EMA is in London today. Do you think EMA will stay in London or not?
Oof.
Or will leave London? No, but I think it's a very
Interesting
important
question. That's a subject for an
Short
entire
one.
afternoon's debate, but I think it's an interesting question. Shows how many things are open. Other question there, and then down there, and then Greg.
It was presented that one of the 4 key challenges areas is mobility of talent and protecting mobility of talent. I would like to know what will be managed differently in the UK to ensure mobility of talent that will be different from what the EU has already achieved. Because if there's one added value of the EU, then it is about mobility of talent. So what will you do differently that has is linked to the reason to leave the EU?
Thank you for your question. Question down here. Down here, Jean.
Thanks. Have you calculated the cost of losing EMA? I mean, has the UK government made an impact assessment on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Could you say it again?
No. Has the UK government made an impact assessment, I mean, in the
sorry,
event of losing
assessment.
EMA?
Okay, and Greg Perry, you had a question. Don't identify yourself.
Very quick question. Regulatory issue, number one issue, I think. Is there any chance whatsoever that the UK would remain within the regulatory structure, the centralized and decentralized system? If not, I really find it very hard to see how we're going to operate as we have done.
Okay, very good. Well, let's, I think the best thing to do with this is I'll give everyone on the panel a chance to pick up whichever of those questions they want to very briefly, because we've got half an hour before we have to close the shop, and I don't want to just stop at this point. So let's start. Emily, you obviously the key person on this. What would you like to answer?
Shouldn't have picked up the microphone at that point, should I? So if I understood correctly, there were 2 questions there about research mobility, 2 about the EMA, and then a final one about regulatory systems. So on research mobility, I think it's a really key issue. I think it's very much recognised as being such. I think about 1 in 6 researchers at the moment in the UK are European citizens. So it's definitely crucial that we keep access to that talent.
We know it's critical. What's the solution, Emily?
So, of course, I can't tell you at the beginning of a 2-year complicated, multifaceted negotiation exactly what the solutions are going to look like in different places. Of course I can't. I hope that's kind of obvious in advance.
What sort of options is your government exploring?
So all I can tell you is that it's it's recognised as a priority, that we need to protect that in the outcome that we get to. I can't tell you exactly how, and I can't get into hypotheticals about how we might do that at this point. But I would want to be very, very clear that it's recognised that we need to find a way of doing that, a way that works, so that we keep access to that talent, whilst at the same time having control over immigration from the EU, which was one of the key issues that the British people voted on with the Brexit referendum results. So, but within that, the access to talent and the freedom of movement that's essential to our research base and to businesses is really key.
Okay.
Shall I leave it there and let
Leave it there for the moment. Let's pursue this. Does anyone else have views on the freedom of movement, talent, and so on? You made the point, Andrew. You want to say anything more about that? Andrew.
Only to say that our firm is very heavily engaged in discussions around how this is going to work. I think the one thing I think the one positive here is that in a digital age, it is not beyond the wit of man for much more flexible systems to be put in place. It is absolutely clear that there will be a system which will enable people to come into the UK, and whether we go back to freedom of movement for workers rather than freedom of movement for people, that may be a way forward. And I understand that there are other member states who are already, in any event, thinking about moving towards freedom of movement for workers in any event. So there may be the European Union may think again about their own approach as they negotiate with the UK.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to pick up on any of this, Brian?
I can't speak as specifically to regulatory, but I think the concept of convergence versus divergence,
yes.
I can give it by an example area where it's complex, but we hope that it resolves into convergence. One is around the unitary patent, if you haven't heard about that. Been working in the EU for years. It was something where we hope to have a single patent filed, single patent examined, single patent granted, and enforced across the EU. One time, done once, enforced across the EU. And that's been in the works for many, many years. I think at one point, they even talked about having it done in 2014, 2015. We're right at the verge of having that done, right? They're talking about rolling that out in 2017, the end of this year. And this is where the convergence comes into place in divergence. As long as the three main holders that have to ratify it are the top patent filing countries, France, UK, and Germany. In UK, in unitary patents, a separate law, regulation from the Brexit law that's in effect right now. And we have assurances from the UK government that they plan on ratifying for the unitary patent. So that's a good thing, right? So finally we hopefully have a single patent. Now, what's going to happen is that when they do withdraw, the UPC, unitary patent laws, say that it's only in effect for EU member states, the way the law is written right now. So obviously, unless the law changes, when the UK withdraws, they'll no longer be part of the unitary system, right? And it would be in the best interest of everyone to have a single patent that you can file across all of Europe, and UK being one of the largest countries to file patents in, to have that continuity. And there's also a tension in another area is enforcement. One part about the unitary patent that it solves is that right now, you have to file patents in each and every country. So if you want to sue somebody for patent infringement or enforce your patent in UK, Germany, and France, you have to bring separate actions into each of those countries. With the unitary patent, you wouldn't have to do that. You go to one court, a uniform court that would enforce your rights in those courts. UK, as I understand it, is targeted to have one of those unitary patent courts around life sciences and chemistry and biochemistry. It's already built and ready to run, right? So the interest in conflict will be there if they're no longer part of the EU and the unitary patent laws aren't changed to include them, then how is that going to work, right? We're going to have a unitary patent court in Europe in UK with non-UK judges enforcing laws around patents. So there's some political tension there that we would hope as part of the negotiations that gets resolved. That would bring some comfort and risk reduction to innovation and bring some convergence around UK working collaboratively with the rest of the EU.
Okay, thanks for that. It's not for me to answer questions. I only ask them. Probably someone else will answer it. But impact assessment, my ass is the answer to that. No, there was no impact assessment at all. If there had been, there was a lengthy study done by the UK government only about 5 years ago of the merits of being members of the European Union, but that sort of got conveniently sidelined and the thing was a rush to judgment. I'd like to talk a little bit about something dear to, I know your heart, because it's regulatory, and yours, I hope. And yes, of course, you can then go on to say whatever else you want. But I'm particularly intrigued, and someone asked about this question of not just the EMA, but all of that implies. How is the UK going to function in a situation where it is no longer a member of the EU? I've heard a lot of stuff about everyone trying to make it so that we have parallel legislation and so on. But in terms of registering, I'm not going to sing it, no. In terms of registration of medicines, you don't just have a question of legislation, you have a great deal of detail attached. And I'm intrigued, I've heard all this stuff about Mogford and of course, Jeremy Hunt talking about how you can bring it all in and it'll all work perfectly like that. I'm no regulatory expert, but it sounds a bit simplistic to me. Would you like to give us a view on how you see that?
Yeah, because obviously, I think the
you.
question that came up is one that I would strongly endorse. I mean, if we cannot find a way to resolve this, it will definitely have an impact, not just for British patients, but all EU patients. So the way, I think it's important to remember that even within our regulatory approach right now, it's a network. It's a network of assessment, it's a network of review. You have an opportunity whereby we already have work-sharing arrangements across the EU regulators. So our current situation with the MHRA is that they undertake a fair bit of the work on rapporteurship work, on other review inspection work, and that's as part of the broader EU network. There is every opportunity to think about, well, could there be work-sharing arrangements in the future which would allow at least both Europe and UK to still benefit from that network value, of which I think everybody can see, and still do that in a way that allows a distinctive outcome, so that if the UK and the EU have the same work-sharing arrangements, it would be up to each party to then provide a license or not. So you can separate out the technical work, if I can put it that way, from the final licensure commercial arrangements. That's not going to work for all things, but it's something that we're exploring now. We've been exploring with the MHRA, and I think that's what Jonathan was referring to when he was speaking last week. Is it a done deal? No, not by a long way. But it is an interesting idea that if it's possible, it would be extremely valuable not only in the short term, but if it's a way of sustaining the approach, would mean that we can still keep the momentum that we have in the EMA and within the European network of regulators, because as I try and remind my colleagues, even in the UK, Europe as a whole is still competing for space. So there are other jurisdictions around the world which are moving quicker in their licensing processes. And we are starting to look like the slow guys in the pack. We can't afford to slow down anymore. And I think this is a solution that would help us get to that outcome, I hope, in the short term and hopefully in the long one. But I don't know if Anne would agree.
Anne, would
There's
give us
a
your
couple of things I wanted to pick up on, because we had a very nice lunch together when we were prepping for the session. And one of the discussions we had, and I'm going to take a higher view here, is that we are not developing drugs for a particular place. We're not developing drugs for UK patients or French patients or US patients. We're developing drugs which are going to work globally. And that brings us a couple of reflections here. From the startup point of view and from those of us who are financing these innovative therapies, we want to make sure there is a path that is efficient and that is recognized throughout the world to get these drugs onto patients. And also to make sure that companies, startups who are investing a lot into these new therapies are able to do so at a certain speed. Speed is of the essence. And of course, getting access to markets and getting access to patient population. And that cannot be seen as a geographic issue. For me, that is very important to put that into the context of the whole startup / VC ecosystem. I'm putting them both together because we have a common goal here. And it's to get these drugs to the patients and, of course, capitalize on all the investment that went into developing these drugs. So the regulatory side of things, I think, is a very nice example and technical example of the bigger issue of when we develop drugs. IP comes into this, and then we've got also, manufacturing comes into this. There's a lot of different things which all joins together, and they have to be looked at as global issues. And I really like the fact that people like Ginny work with people like Emily and trying to get some credible solutions, but I think we need to also make sure the rest of Europe is engaged into this. It can't just be a question about what the UK is going to do, because we are in a global system. And I think perhaps even beyond that, that may be a good time to engage with the FDA and make sure we do have procedures which make sense, which are efficient. And that's a huge amount of cost, time, effort from startups and from other people in that ecosystem. And I think we have an opportunity. That you were talking about silver lining earlier. Maybe there is a silver lining here, and we can do things a bit better.
Well, I was asking about silver linings. I wasn't talking about silver linings. I've still to see the silver linings myself, but I take your point. When it comes down to it, and maybe you can help out on this, Emily, all this fine talk about, yes, we can find ways of working together, particularly when we're talking about things like authorizations and so on. Ultimately, the decisions when push comes to shove on these things are subject at the moment to EU law and consequently to the supervision ultimately of the European Court of Justice if necessary. Now, if the UK government is determined to remove itself from the purview of the European Court of Justice, I don't see how there's a snowball's chance in hell of doing some sort of deal, no matter how clever you are with the wording, of fiddling something where the UK, the EU, oh yeah, we'll agree, we'll use the same system, we'll broadly agree and we'll work together and so on. But situations arise where these things go right down to the line, right down to the wire, and without some sort of overarching agreement, which at the moment seems to be completely off the agenda, if I understand the UK government position correctly, I don't see how any of this is anything more than empty talk about nuts and bolts, which have got nothing to do with the real problem of how you assure integration and supervision and oversight in this sort of coherent market, even if it's not the internal market or whatever. I don't see how any of it can work without agreement. You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll just
Please
jump in quick while Emily prepares her thoughts. I think you're right, and any free trade arrangement, you're going to need to have some sort of court. I mean, there's got to be some way to adjudicate over issues that come up. Why do you think there won't be a similar one that would be established if we get to a free trade agreement? I mean, that could be the very platform that would be then the adjudicator for any.
It's two hypotheses, isn't it? One, that we have a free trade agreement,
Well,
the other,
I give
why
you
wouldn't
that.
it be accepted? One of the reasons I could think of is 27 member states would have to sign up to it. And although the UK
But we
may
already
have
have
wonderful
them.
ideas, what guarantee is there that other member states are going to say, well, it may be right for you guys, but we're not bothered about you.
But those courts already exist. With the existing, like the EFTA has its own court to adjudicate around these issues. So it is possible. So it is possible.
And just to add
Emily,
to
you
that,
want to come in on that?
yeah, and just to add to that, yes, I think A, it's possible, and B, there are reasons for optimism, which builds on things that other people have been saying about the fact that getting to a good deal that works for everyone on this isn't just in the UK's interest, it's in Europe's interest, it's in the EU's interest. It's in the UK's interest that the deal is something that works for the EU and creates a strong and functioning EU, and it's also in the EU's interest that the deal works for the UK. So I think that coupled with the fact that you have businesses working across the borders, researchers moving across the borders, all of whom will have quite a pragmatic outlook where they just want to be able to get on and do their business or do their research, work with the best people wherever they may be based, puts you actually in a really good position to be able to find solutions and to find solutions that will work for everybody, and to find solutions across what is a very complicated and unprecedented set of negotiating pieces.
You think I'm very mean, but I'm not at all comforted by all these nice, gentle words about everyone's best interests.
I had a feeling you might not be.
but I understand why you're obliged to say it, and I'm grateful to you. There's a question down here. Would you like to come in, sir? You've got the microphone there, thanks.
Andrew made the very important point earlier that there are other bigger things that we should be putting our attention on as well. For example, what the Trump administration may do in terms of regulatory issues. We've also heard just around this discussion the importance of improving regulation generally. But Brexit is a terrible distraction from all of this, and increasingly as the fine wishes have to turn into hard reality, there's going to be a complete consumption of more and more brain power on the Brexit negotiations and distracting us from these bigger, tangible, real issues. So if we're looking, as this session is specified, as trying to find the best solution, and if the actual outcome isn't that positive overall, although people are trying to smile and put good words on it, and if the whole divorce process is such a distraction, what are each of you doing to try and have the best solution of all, which is to jam on the brakes and cancel this whole Brexit thing and get British opinion and British politicians to change their minds on this?
I think you'll probably be followed up by a great number of people. We'll elect you as president, and we can go ahead with that right now. Well, there you are, Emily. There's a challenge principally for you, but then the others can pick it up as well.
So I think the first thing to say is that the UK is leaving the European Union. The Article 50 has been triggered. The process is in motion. And as we've talked a lot about, it's not going to be a simple negotiation. But I think probably what is important, particularly speaking to your point about not sucking in a lot of brain power is required to do that, not sucking in more than is necessary, is everybody getting on and thinking pragmatically now about what the solutions are, what are the specific issues, and how do we address them to make sure that we are going into the negotiations as informed as possible with the right ambitions. So I think that would be all I would say. I'm sure others will have more.
Okay,
to
well,
add.
do other people want to come in? Andrew, I know you were quite eloquent about this at lunchtime.
I at a personal level, don't disagree with you. In a question, when it comes to political reality, I don't think there's any question of the decision being reversed. Both the major political parties, if I can still use that term, in the UK are clear that we're leaving the European Union. And I think frankly, it would be a diversion of energy to try to think that we can reverse the process. You know, the UK is a democratic country. We had a referendum. We observed the views of the majority of the people. And if there is a positive here, it is actually that I think it is likely to reduce the level of cynicism around the political process. People had a vote, it made a difference. And so while I personally might have preferred the answer to have been different, it is what it is. We are going to make as much of a success of this as is possible. And I think to play parlour games around how do you get it to reverse is probably, while emotionally I might agree with you, I don't think politically it's very helpful.
Chris, as an outsider from Boston, how do you see this process? Is it something that should be stopped because it's just completely crazy and we should go back and think again?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about U.S. politics and Trump, and that was referenced many times. And I think to Andrew's point, political systems run their course, and they tell you something. And I think in the UK they've spoken. And from outside looking in, we expect it to happen, and the best we can do is prepare. Right, and I think you're right. It is going to take a lot of resources, and the best we can do is watch and get ready to change along with it.
Ginny, I remember I asked you when we had our lunch some time ago, when I interviewed you, I asked you what you were planning if the thing fell apart and didn't go ahead. You said you don't plan for non-events, as it were, but what's your feeling about the idea of reversing the process?
Yeah, and actually there was some interesting write-ups after the Parliament met yesterday about could you reverse it, can't you reverse it, and apparently there's legal opinions on either side, but I think again, it's in, and as far as I understand, obviously from the British government, this is the way forward. Just to be very clear, the pharmaceutical industry together with the biotech industry, we both had a Remain position going into the election, so I'll be honest and say I was arrogant enough thinking going into that election that I wouldn't have to spend the rest of my year doing this. And I was wrong, badly wrong. And I think there's a lot of people who were knocked for six in that period of time because they weren't necessarily expecting the outcome that happened. But we are where we are now, and my companies, whom I represent, what they want me to do is get to a best option possible for them to be able to continue to do the important work they do to develop and provide medicines in Europe, including the UK, and get to that answer as quickly as possible. Because what's most worrying to me is that in this period of confusion and lack of detail, other people might just decide that, you know what, Europe's just a little bit too complicated right now. Let's just stick with plans elsewhere, or let's just stay in the States. We understand Trump has his issues, but we understand how the rest of the system works. So we need to really come up with plans that they won't be finished, but we at least have to keep the door wide open. So the issues around making people at least aware of what's under debate at every point in time is a priority for us right now.
Okay, well, we're at the end almost of our time. I promised the panelists I would allow them each 2 minutes for closing remarks or take-home messages or whatever. We haven't begun, I'm afraid, to get all the way into all the areas we wanted to discuss. Maybe some of you want to throw in further thoughts as you offer your closing remarks. But Anne, would you like to kick off with your 2 minutes of closing remarks and take-home messages?
I will do, and I will annoy you by going off on tangent slightly. I think it's important to recognize the importance of this debate and the importance of the implications which have been triggered with that vote. But I think we also need to be quite positive because we are here in Lyon, in BIOVISION. We see a lot of great innovation. I have seen a lot of colleagues, there are a lot of us who want to invest in this great innovation. I think it's a very exciting time for the industry in general, for startups, as well as for pharma, to be fair. And I think we need to also compartmentalize our thoughts and not get dragged down by this, I wish the vote had been different, or I don't quite know what's happening and I'm going to be paralyzed. You know, research carries on, innovation carries on, and I think we need to stay with that thought, even more so today when I've seen, you know, great pitches from the Catalyst pitch, the investor pitches. We have some great entrepreneurs, wherever they come from, throughout Europe, and got people ready to finance them. And I think we need to be positive about the industry.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
And thank you for the segue. We're also here to, Fully Lana, we sponsor BIOVISION and support Only Leon and Big Booster, which has a lot of young companies in there. So a lot of innovations going on. Again, IP, the world's not fallen. There'll be some of the same tools going forward. There'll be different tools. There'll be a different landscape. To my earlier point, it's all about preparation. But more importantly for companies, it's going to be strategy. So you're going to have different tools to protect yourself and figuring that out. And as we watch and monitor something, even though we can't control it, we can react to it. And reacting it intelligently to continue business and protect innovation is what we're going to do. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Andrew?
I think it's important that we understand that that no one's died. This is the end of the UK being a member of the European Union. People who read history at university in 30 years' time will doubtless be faced with a stock question as to, why did the UK leave the European Union? I'm not trying to make light of it, but I think we should have confidence that intelligent people acting with goodwill will come to a sensible position. There are really important questions around the access of medicines for patients around Europe, which to my mind, need to be at the forefront of people's concerns. So to what Ginny was saying earlier, to make sure that people continue to get their medicines. The other thing, but at a practical level, there is a great deal that companies can do to understand the impact of Brexit on their businesses. And at one level, the UK economy, frankly, has had an enormous boost from the change in the exchange rate. Unemployment's at a 30-year low. Employment's never been higher. Growth is actually coming through much more strongly than people were expecting. So the UK economy is in a good place. It's doing well. Public finances even are coming back into balance. So the UK is a very good place to do business. The triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London continues to attract a huge amount of investment into the UK. So the UK is going to be a place where people will want to base their businesses, and as people look to take the fullest advantage of that, there is a good deal that companies can do now, and forgive me for saying so, we at PwC are doing a great deal of work with UK companies and foreign and non-UK companies, helping them understand how they will respond to a changing environment. So, is there a good deal to do? Yes, there is, but I think we should aim to look forward with confidence, and actually I think, not being overly optimistic, I don't think, potentially good news for an EU which can perhaps move more quickly in the direction which it wishes without the UK, while the UK forges a slightly different path for itself, but while maintaining a very full and friendly relationship with the European Union.
Okay, thank you. Ginny?
So I just want to say thanks again to have a chance to talk about these issues in an EU 27 country, because I think we've been focusing on these issues now for the past 10 months, and a lot of it's been in London, it's been in the UK, it's been inward focusing, and we need to start sharing our ideas and our proposals with you all so that you can engage, because at the end of the day, this is going to have to be a shared resolution. For life sciences and for medicines. So I think Anne mentioned it earlier that it hadn't maybe been discussed enough, and I think that's right. So it's a great opportunity to be able to at least start to talk about these issues directly with our partners in Europe, and not just sequestered in London amongst ourselves. So a big thanks to that, because I think that's really where the success of this process will lie.
Okay, thank you. Emily, the last word to you.
Thank you. Just to echo the thanks for being involved in this debate. I think it's really important, and I know the government, as government, we really appreciate the way in which actors across the sector have engaged, have come forward to share their expertise, their concerns, their pragmatic ideas as to potential solutions, and we really appreciate that, because it's only in working together like that that we are going to get to this outcome that works for everyone, that I think that we can get to. Also, just to echo the point about the life sciences sector and what an exciting time it is for the sector beyond the Brexit debate, and not to lose sight of that, because I think there's some really exciting, revolutionary new innovations coming through. And then just final point that I think it's important as well to keep our kind of sight line above just the next 2 years, on the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. What do we want our relationships to be like with our key partners in Europe on that time horizon, and what do they want their relationships to be like with us? Because we've been key partners, shared values, shared interests, and it's really important that we protect all of that and build on it as we go forward.
All right, thank you very much. Well, thank you to all the panelists. I'm not going to offer any type of summing up. You all have made your own assessments of the validity, strength, and consistency of the views put forward. But I would say that just as an outsider and a journalist who just looks at this from outside the UK, when I hear people saying the UK is just trying to do some cherry picking, I can't help feeling I've heard an awful lot of cherry picking suggested here, and I'm not sure how far cherry picking is going to fly when push comes to shove in negotiating with the other 27 member states. I think it is, as you said yourself, and I was going to make the point, very interesting to have this debate here. I do have the feeling very often that people in the UK talking about this are still talking about it as if it was a UK debate, and it's not a UK debate. The UK is very much a junior partner in a European debate, and the UK will get its ass kicked if it doesn't have better arguments than it's done so far, I suspect. But maybe I'm wrong. I think Andrew would certainly disagree with that, and Emily, I'm sure, would. But thank you all anyway very much for taking part in this. Thank you very much to the audience for your questions and your interest, and we'll see you in, I think Emily said 50 years' time. She said, this is the person who said we can't talk too much about hypotheses. But anyway, thank you very much for all of that. I'd ask you to thank the panelists in the customary fashion. And have a very good time in Lyon.